You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney Flynn. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Mama podcast. I'm your host, Christine Flynn. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Catholic Mama. I paused for a second there. I usually introduce myself as Christine Mooney Flynn. But I've decided that I'm just going by Christine Flynn. I have to officially change my name, which I will be doing shortly. Mooney's my maiden name, and I had hyphenated to Mooney Flynn. If anybody cares to listen to any of this, you might not. Well, I used to be a feminist. I used to be a raging liberal at one point in my life, and to hold on to that last name of mine seemed very, very important in that respect. To make sure people knew that I wasn't entering into the patriarchal traditional marriage type thing. And so I hyphenated my last name also because my husband and I did not have a very holy relationship when we got started, and we had our first child before we were married. And I had put my last name as one of my son's middle names, and because I had heard that it was easier to travel with a child if you had the same name. And then I wound up keeping mine when we got married and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I hyphenated my last name. It's a big mistake. It was like this last vestige that was still hanging on of this awful feminist idea that I used to have. So I'm going to get rid of it. So from now on, I'm just going to introduce the podcast as your host, Christine Flynn. And we're going to be done with, I will keep Mooney as my middle name as I had intended to at the beginning, but here we are. Diatribe for a minute and a half. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about Padre Pio, which I'm very excited to talk about. I did not know much about Padre Pio. I'd only heard the few typical quotations that I've heard of his, like pray, hope, and don't worry. That one is very popular. I had knew that he had the gift of bilocation, being able to be in two places at once, could really host, I don't know if that's the right word, but host some pretty intense confession sessions for people walking into his confessional for the Sacrament of Reconciliation. And I knew that he had the stigmata. And those were only things that I really understood. Had come to know, and I have a squeaky chair, had come to know anything about over the past, it took about 2 years of being Catholic before I knew even that much. So interestingly, my husband, for whatever reason, bought on Kindle a Padre Pio book. Well, not that he wrote, but about him. It was written by a woman named Diane Allen, and it's a collection of stories that either people had firsthand accounts with Padre Pio. It could have been childhood up through, just a few days before his death. It could have been secondhand accounts where, my grandmother has this story and now they're sharing, the grandchildren are sharing it with the author, Diane Allen. It's called Pray, Hope, and Don't Worry, True Stories of Padre Pio, I believe is the name of it. There's book one. That's the only one I've read. There's apparently 2 books, which I really would like to read the second one. So these books are filled with amazing stories about everything that Padre Pio did in the course of his lifetime. And it was so coming from a New Age background such as myself, this Eastern religion that influenced me, a lot of my beliefs of levitation or walking through walls or bilocation, being able to be in two places at the same time. These were things that were in the realm of possibility for those who were enlightened. And of course, it's always kind of fun. The first time that I heard this next line that I'll explain, I thought, well, isn't that just curious? That seems a little suspect. But, if you couldn't achieve any of these spectacular abilities, it was just because you didn't believe enough. I mean, you can't walk through a wall. Well, the onus isn't on me, the teacher, trying to get you to do that. That's you not being able to believe that you can walk through walls or whatever. It's a little suspect, a little suspect. Anyway, so It's just interesting. So, Padre Pio's abilities of being able to see into people's hearts and minds and being able to be in different places at different times across the world from where he actually lived, his physical body was, to even showing up after his death in ways that almost seemed too hokey for me. When I first heard about Padre Pio, I had a difficult time about it because of all those years that I spent being a New Age type person and chasing those kinds of experiences. I have this guard up when it comes to, excuse me if you guys heard that. I have a guard come up when anything like this sort of, it's not New Age, but these miraculous, spectacular kind of abilities arise in somebody. I'm skeptical of it. I guess that's really what it boils down to, because of all the years that I wasn't skeptical of it and realized that was all hoax. And misleading people and misled myself for all that time. Now I'm a little bit more skeptical about it, if that makes sense. So I really wasn't that interested in reading the Padre Pio book at first, but my husband said, hey, I bought this on Kindle. I think it's interesting. I've read the first little bit. You might like it. Yeah, okay. And I was nursing the baby this one night, and I wanted to read something and wanted to do something useful rather than just scroll through social media. And I'm logged into the same Kindle account on my phone as what my husband's is. So I opened it up and I was scrolling through and I was like, let's give this a try. Because my husband buys a bunch of interesting books. I was like, well, I'll just read something that he bought and that'll at least get me doing something more productive than looking at Facebook. So I opened it up and I can't say I couldn't put the book down, but I couldn't put my phone down. I couldn't close the Kindle app. Which isn't that funny? If you're older than like 20, that probably sounds crazy. I could not close the Kindle app. I was so moved by the authenticity and the true wonder and faith and obedience to the church that Padre Pio exhibited. And I mean, immediately gained this real devotion to him and devoured the book and have just done as much research as I possibly can about Padre Pio because I'm just so enthralled by him. And the skepticism that I once had was certainly my own fault, the faults of my own past and my own wrong beliefs all those years. It has nothing to do with Padre Pio, nothing to do with the church. It was all on me. And I'm happy to say that as far as the life of Padre Pio goes and his experiences, I am a true believer and have, whether or not, I hope he has willingly accepted me because I asked, as his spiritual daughter. But anyway, so I wanted to spend some time because happily enough, in a couple of days, I'll be heading to Michigan, about a 6-hour drive, to venerate first class relics of Padre Pio, like a day before his feast day. His feast day is September 23rd. The veneration and the relics will be available for veneration on September 22nd. So I'm just so excited. Like, it's even the crust with the blood and from the wounds of the stigmata on his hands and his hair and a few other things. So I'm just so excited about it. And since his feast day is coming up as well, I thought, I'll share some interesting facts that I have found in my research about Padre Pio. And also just, I have to actually, right after we get back from Michigan to see these relics, it's my turn to host a homeschool co-op meeting at our house. And it's a liturgical living one. So we're switching off and doing different themes and, park days and field trips and all that. But it just so happens to be that it's my turn at our house to do a liturgical living one. And wow, Padre Pio it is. So I'll share a couple of ideas that either you can, if you're homeschooling, you can do. If you are just interested in doing some liturgical living at home, I've got some simple ideas that I will share with you in this episode as well. So for most people, I would imagine that you know who Padre Pio was. He was a priest in southern Italy. And which actually you'll see a lot. His name is Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, I think. Pietrelcina, if I'm saying that right. I might not be. My Italian is very rusty. He was born Francesco Forgione, and he died on September 23rd, 1968, which is why we have his feast day on September 23rd every year. And he was canonized by Pope St. John Paul II. He prayed constantly. That was something that really encouraged me. He prayed upwards of 30 or more rosaries a day. The man really had this thin veil between this world and in heaven. I mean, it's just so phenomenal to me that somebody could pray. I mean, he was sitting in the confessional for hours every day, and he could pray like this and listen to others and really genuinely be present. It's not like he was just tuning out other people and so he could get his prayers in. I mean, it's just amazing to me that he would have that time. And then between that and the messages that a woman allegedly got for the book, Holy Apostolate of Motherhood, if I'm saying that, or if I'm remembering that book correctly, where Mary encourages the woman who's receiving these messages to pray all the mysteries of the rosary every day. And then hearing that Padre Pio prayed like 34 a day, I think I can get my four full rosaries in. And speaking of, he was sitting in the confessional all the time. Like I mentioned, he could hear as many as 25,000 confessions a year. That's an immense number. I mean, he was really dedicated. This is a man who was truly dedicated to the salvation of souls. So, and he had the stigmata, right? He had the wounds of Christ during the crucifixion on his palms, on his feet, but also the wounds that Christ suffered on his shoulder from carrying the cross, and on his side by his ribs. So, those are probably the facts that you know that he had these miraculous abilities. He prayed a lot. He heard a lot of confessions. He had the stigmata. He was Italian. I mean, these are general facts. So those are the ones that just set the stage here. So let's start off. The first one that I thought was very interesting is that no matter the personal cost, the cost to himself, his own comfort, and his own preferences, he always preached and practiced obedience to the church. So when word was spreading that Padre Pio was as miraculous as he was, that he was able to do all these things, the church, rightly so, because you don't want a charlatan going about doing these things in the name of Christ, but actually leading people astray, they restricted his abilities. They asked him not to hear confession or not to do mass. He couldn't see his personal advisor, his own spiritual counselor, that was the only person that Padre Pio said really and truly knew him in this world. And I think once that decision was made, Padre Pio never spoke to that spiritual advisor, his best friend, ever again. And it was like decades and decades of his life still left that he did not speak to this man ever again. And it pained him deeply. Yet, he still obeyed. He said nothing. He didn't complain. He just said that it did hurt, right? I mean, it's okay to have emotions. But he didn't lash out at the church. He didn't condemn the leadership of the church. He understood that the church was doing this, although it hurt him personally. The church was doing this in order to maintain the safety of the soul, the health and safety of the souls of those who were devoted to Padre Pio and Padre Pio himself. Again, if Padre Pio wasn't legitimate and he was just a charlatan trying to, get money or power or fame or lure people away from the church, I mean, that is a good thing. The church was looking out for its flock in doing that. Now, of course, they realized later that he really does have the stigmata. He really is able to deliver these really deep confessions and really get to the heart of the matter and read people's minds. He's able to visit people without actually being in the room. Like the church came to understand this. But I thought that was one of the most interesting things about Padre Pio, that no matter what, the man did not take a vacation. He couldn't celebrate mass for a certain time. He could never speak to his spiritual advisor and his best friend ever again because of the church's decision to make sure that he was a legitimate spiritual mystic. And he was okay with it. He followed the church. How many of us we know so many Catholics who need this kind of humility and obedience to Mother Church, because he said, I love this quote, I'm going to paraphrase, but Padre Pio says that even the discipline, the slap of the church was not so bad because it was the mother's slap, right? It's not the worst slap that you could get. They're not the worst discipline. The second interesting fact I found about him in my research is that, and I mentioned it kind of before, the veil between worlds thinned near him. He had physical spiritual attacks. The devil physically attacked him. And one night he received such a bashing, such a horrible attack from the devil. I mean, really beaten up, black and blue. And somebody came in and found him unconscious on the floor, and he's covered in bruises and he's really beat up. And, but he was resting on a pillow. His head was resting on a pillow. And he said that, the Blessed Mother had come and put the pillow under his head knowing that he had survived such a terrible attack. Speaking of, he always had visits from the Blessed Virgin Mary. She was present with him so much of his life, and he had such a great devotion to her as his mother. Dear Mama. And also one story in particular that I thought was so moving is that someone was in the church Padre Pio loved the Christmas Mass. And someone who was in the church in an area where maybe they weren't quite supposed to be at the time. Anyway, they happened to see Padre Pio walking through some part of the church, and he was carrying a baby. And the baby was all just glowing and beautiful, and Padre Pio was glowing too, and he had a beautiful, happy look on his face, just cooing this little baby. And at first, the person who was watching thought it was like just the baby doll from the nativity scene. But then he realized that the baby was alive and moving, and then it vanished. This person had seen Padre Pio cooing and loving and cuddling with the baby Jesus on Christmas Eve. And I thought that was just so wonderful. So even though Padre Pio had these immense spiritual attacks on his life, and these immense physical struggles, whether it's with the stigmata, he had ill health when he was a child, to the church kind of separating him from his best friend and spiritual advisor, he still loved so much. And to get those gifts, those spiritual gifts as well. He really had some amazing consolations despite all of his troubles. He also held a high standard for behavior. And when I read this next story that I'll tell you, it really made me rethink my daily routine. And although, I should say I pray a lot. I am very devoted. We homeschool, and religious education is part of every single day. But the one thing I struggled with has been going to daily Mass consistently. I would go a couple days a week, which is good. I mean, that's all very good. I would never miss a Sunday Mass unless I was ill. But this story I thought was very interesting. So he had a high standard for behavior. And he once said a mother was lamenting to Padre Pio, that she couldn't get to daily Mass. It was just too early. Now, his daily Masses, by the way, were at 5 o'clock in the morning, up like a really steep rocky hill with no roads at the time. And this woman was lamenting to him, like, I just can't get my children up to Mass every day. I just can't do it. And he just very matter-of-factly told her, well, you just have to get up earlier. Like, oh, crap. I do too. So there we go. Now we go to daily Mass every single morning, and we have been doing this for almost 3 months and have not missed a Mass unless we were traveling. So, I mean, there's high standards of behavior. I know too, actually, a friend online had sent me the wardrobe requirements that Padre Pio had set out for ladies, and they are strict. They are certainly strict. Now, I personally, they're a little too strict for even me, but I can see that it's almost like a good balance, right? The pendulum swings in both directions when it comes to modesty, and our entire culture is so terribly, terribly immodest. That if you look at Padre Pio's requirements for women's dress, not revealing too much extra skin if you don't need to, and you take even just away just a little bit of that and change your wardrobe and change your mindset and become a little bit more modest, well, then that's worth it. I think we're getting in the right direction there. Do you have to, put on a giant sack and, not show any skin? No. But so if you look at Padre Pio, say you look it up yourself and you say, wow, those are really strict requirements. They are. And he had a very high standard for behavior and dress and decorum. However, I would encourage you, if you are not, say, the most modest dresser, give a look and maybe pick something small out, maybe change something. Actually, I got to say, over the years, this past year, I have even become more modest myself in my dress. And I was doing this even before I saw Padre Pio's very strict requirements. But I got to say, I like it better. It feels more feminine. All those years that I thought I was being womanly by showing a lot of skin, it's actually quite the opposite. And I enjoy my more modest behavior and dress now more so than I ever thought I would when I was younger and not a Catholic. Okay, interesting fact number 4. He exuded a fragrance to some people, and it was not always pleasant. So for most people, if they smelled a certain something, say they were... say their family member was sick and in the hospital, and they were able to bring in some first-class relics to, place on the person's chest or have them venerate or pray over. later on, after the relics had gone, and they were still sitting with their loved one, say in the hospital, and the loved one's asleep or unconscious or something, say, there could have been this smell in the room. It could have been roses. It could have been lilacs, incense, this coffee. This smell would have just kind of exuded in the room. What else? Cinnamon, vanilla, lavender, pine, orange, roses. These are all, there's a big list of different smells that somebody might have. And it smells differently to everybody. And then, miraculously, the person would have woken up or gotten better or something, which I thought was just so fascinating. So the smells were smelled different depending on who it was that was smelling. You could have several people in the same room smell a different fragrance, but then know that Padre Pio was there, have that feeling, or they'd been praying to him to help with their loved one or a situation. And yet there was a couple stories where somebody smelled something, and one person who was in good standing with the church smelled a beautiful fragrance, and the other person in the room said it smelled awful and made them feel awful. Isn't that interesting? Maybe it's just, wake up, go to church, confess. Okay. The last interesting fact, although I have two bonuses that I thought were fun, so I wanted to show you that. But a last interesting fact is that he will take any American as a spiritual son or daughter. So I got through reading part of this Pray, Hope, and Don't Worry book by Diane Allen, and I thought, I want him to be my spirit. I kept seeing these stories of people saying, oh, and so-and-so was his spiritual daughter, or so-and-so was his spiritual son. I was like, I want Padre Pio as my spiritual father. So I prayed and I said, Padre Pio, Saint Pio, please accept me as your spiritual daughter. Well, this is after I closed the book or, exited the Kindle app that day. The next day I open it, I turn to the next chapter, and lo and behold, it's this story where he's talking to an American soldier stationed in Italy at the time. And he tells the soldier, I will accept any American as a spiritual son or daughter. His only stipulation, which I thought was very funny, he says, please tell them never to embarrass me in front of Jesus and Mary. So if you're going to ask Padre Pio to be your spiritual father, just don't embarrass him. All right. Do the best you can. Do not embarrass him in front of Jesus and Mary, because he's got his work cut out for most of us. So those are 5 interesting facts. 2 quick bonus ones. He'd like to drink an American beer when he could. I like that about him. And 2, his image actually saved a family from being taken by Nazis. During World War II, somebody had a picture of Padre Pio hanging in their front hallway, and the Nazis were busting into people's streets, into people's homes, and the Nazis burst into this one family's home, and as they did, the picture of Padre Pio fell off the wall and fell so that it was face up in the hallway. And as soon as the Nazis came in, they looked down the picture, they looked at the family and said, oh, sorry, wrong house, and they left. Isn't that amazing? So as soon as I read that, and the crazy climate that we're living in today in our political and cultural climate, I framed a picture of Padre Pio and put it up in my hallway. So why not? See what happens. And I always ask him every day to pray for me and to help me. There is also, now I'm thinking about it, a friend of mine had told me there is a beautiful prayer for after communion that Padre Pio had written. And I highly recommend you look that up, Padre Pio's communion prayer. And I don't have it all memorized. I don't have it handy. Excuse me. But I do have, the snippet that I remember enough is, stay with me. Christ, stay with me. And so I pray that Padre Pio, before I receive communion, I pray that he will help get me in the right disposition to receive Christ as best as I can. And I ask Padre Pio to pray for me that I will be able to keep Christ with me, and ask Christ to stay with me, even as I know that I will be the one that probably will leave him if anybody's doing the leaving as a sinful person. So all these stories, all the stories that I mentioned here came out of Pray, Hope, and Don't Worry, True Stories of Padre Pio, Book 1 by Diane Allen. I think Diane and her husband, who's a deacon, and I'm blanking on his name, and also of course, I'm blanking a lot of things, okay? I've got a teething baby. They've been collecting these stories for years from people that they've met either on pilgrimages or through the church. They have a Padre Pio prayer group. And so they've been collecting all these true stories, and they are just amazing. I highly recommend it. I bought a copy and sent it to my parents just because, he's such a compelling compelling and modern person, right? So he's recent. Sometimes with the saints, they feel so far away from us. But Padre Pio lived, not so very long ago. And especially in this time when we have so many unknowns. Of course, life is just one big unknown. We don't know what God's plans are for us. And yet this time it's very apparent, whether it's because of coronavirus, because of rioting and protesting and the political climate. This is just a world filled very noticeably with unknowns. And Padre Pio did a lot of his great quotes, even pray, hope, and don't worry. I mean, these things, those quotes like that came from a time when people in Italy were petrified of what the Nazis were going to do in their hometowns and how they were going to disrupt their lives and what was going to happen in World War II. So it was in a similar climate as what we are experiencing now, is what I'm trying to say. And so he is a man that we can cling to and bring and trust will bring us closer to faith in Jesus. So awesome facts. Okay, now, if you are wanting to celebrate Padre Pio's feast day on September 23rd, his birth into heaven, here's just a couple of ideas that I will be doing in our homeschool co-op. So one is you can make either, hand form or get hand cookie cutters, or even like trace your kid's hand with a toothpick and then cut it out and carefully get the cookie dough onto a cookie sheet. But you can make Rice Krispie or sugar cookie hands, and then decorate them by putting a little bit of red icing for stigmata. I thought that was a fun idea. We're going to be doing that with our homeschool group. I'm also going to be giving each child, I think there's about 10 kids who will be participating. I'm going to give each of the children a lap book, which is just a folder, just a plain tan folder. And I'm going to put a Padre Pio coloring page on it. They can color in him on one side. So when it's called a lap book. If you're a homeschooler, you probably know what this is. So I'm being redundant and you know this stuff, but just in case somebody listening doesn't know, you get just like a plain like filing folder and you open it up, and that's a lap book, right? It could sit in your kid's lap. So on the left side, say I'll have a Padre Pio coloring sheet pasted in. And on the other side, I'm going to actually use from Lazy Liturgical. Jenna Hines was on the podcast a while back. But Lazy Liturgical, she has this great bundle of easy activities and coloring pages for all of the saints and the feast days and all that. So she has, for Padre Pio's feast day, she has handwriting practice for the pray, hope, and don't worry quote of his. So I'm just going to print that out and have the kids practice their handwriting with that. And then also I'm going to put a map of Italy and have them find, we're going to talk about where Padre Pio lived and where where the monastery was that he actually spent his life in as well. And then it's a fun game, again, Padre Pio had that different fragrance. So we're going to play that smell game, where you choose different objects, put it in a paper baggie, and then you have the kids smell it and try to figure out what they're smelling. So I'm going to do that. I have, I'm going to use, there's so many different ones and I'm not going to be able to get all of them. There's certain flowers and such I just can't get. It's not going to be easy enough. So I'm going to get roses. I have cinnamon sticks at home, vanilla, lavender. I have some lavender essential oils. I'm going to use pine. That's easy. And orange blossoms or orange. So I'm going to make a fun little game for the kids as well with that. And then finally, when Jenny Shaw was on the podcast the other day about how to celebrate all the liturgical living and the calendar and the saints for the rest of the fall until Advent. She had mentioned that one of the favorite things that she does in her family is they do a riff on the pray, hope, and don't worry quotation of his. And they say pray, hope, and donut, like a donut worry. And they just eat donuts. So that's fun too. So I hope you have a wonderful time celebrating Padre Pio, because you should celebrate Padre Pio. Read up about him. Again, the book is Pray, Hope, and Don't Worry, True Stories of Padre Pio. There's book 1 and 2. And I'm so excited. I will come back, and actually in my email list, I will tell you more and put some photos in of my visit with the veneration of the first class relics of Padre Pio. So if you would like to know more about my experience with the Padre Pio first class relics, I invite you to join my email list. You can go to thecatholicmama.com. That's right. That's my website, if I can remember it. And you can get the free ebook for how to talk to your kids about God. That way you'll get on the email list and you'll get emails from me. I email about once a week or so. And also, if you haven't already looked into it, please, I encourage you, I'll put the link in the show notes to check out the Domestic Church. It's my new Patreon-like membership that I've started, where we're going into like a unique virtual book club every month with different themes. We're doing the life of prayer for the next 3 months, and tackling the interior castle by Saint Teresa of Avila first. Easy, minimalist. That's my favorite, minimalist. Activities and recipes for celebrating the saints. We'll do one of those a month. Spiritual bouquets, lots of goodies, including how to convert your atheist husband mini series with my own husband, and how to break down barriers to the faith that people might have. So I encourage you to check that out. It's $10 a month. I hope you join me there at the Domestic Church and cultivate a life of radiant faith. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and until next time, everyone. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy-to-understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight.